The news is in constant flux. I just want to know what's going to happen. Oh, crystal ball, tell me how Brexit will befall.
It's quite simple, actually. There's only really 7 ways things can work out.
Really? What are they?
Well, listen close, and I will tell all.
Great, then maybe we can go to the Aztec zone.
Actually, I think you're thinking of the crystal maze. This is a crystal
Well, if you're
ball.
going to be like that.
Hey, stop! No! I've got so many hot takes!
5 ways Brexit can end.
Now, I know this might sound a bit like clickbait, and hey, we're a small channel, it takes what it takes. But despite all the talk of Saturday sittings and indicative votes and double custom rules, there are a few things that either will or won't happen.
So yeah, we made most of this on Wednesday before Johnson's deal was announced, and we've done a few hasty reshoots on the Thursday. The eagle-eyed of you might notice a few slight continuity errors, but really, you'll barely notice a thing.
So Boris Johnson has got a deal. Compared to Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, this is a harder Brexit for Britain, which will leave the EU's rulebook and be able to strike its own trade deals, but a much softer Brexit for Northern Ireland, which will effectively be treated as a continued member of the EU, at least in the near future. But leaving aside the substance of Johnson's deal, what happens next? Parliament will either accept the deal, it will reject the deal, or it will accept it with conditions. If Parliament does reject the deal, Johnson will either follow the law and seek an extension, or defy the law and not. Each of these pathways has its own political consequences, so we thought we'd take a look at what these consequences are, so we can better understand what does eventually happen. Without any further ado, let's hit it! In our first scenario, Boris Johnson takes this deal from the European Union and brings it to Parliament, where it wins. His exit deal becomes law. The UK enters a new transition period where it irons out details of a future trading relationship with Europe. And crucially, Brexit has happened. We expect an election would follow soon after, given Johnson desperately wants a majority. With Brexit delivered, we imagine this election would be the Conservatives to lose. But for this to happen, Johnson will need to build a majority in Parliament that supports his deal. This means uniting Eurosceptic Tories, expelled former Tory Remainers, some Labour MPs, and the DUP. At the time of filming, it's an open question whether the DUP will support Johnson's deal because of how it separates Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. Johnson's response to this is that the DUP will have a chance to get out of this arrangement later on should the NI Assembly as a whole vote to leave it. He's also willing to give Northern Ireland shed loads of cash just to make the problem go away. But if this doesn't work, his deal is scuppered. The DUP is necessary but not sufficient. He will need to get some Labour MPs from Leave voting constituencies to support him. Given that Theresa May could only get 3 such MPs to support her softer version of Brexit, we're going to make our first big prediction and say that Boris Johnson will not be able to get any deal through Parliament nice and easy. Which leads us to... The second scenario starts the same as before. Johnson takes his deal from the EU and brings it to Parliament, but this time he can't convince enough opposition MPs to back him without concessions. Rather, in this version of events, opposition MPs propose allowing Johnson's deal to pass through Parliament, but only on the condition the deal is then put to a referendum. Having no other way of passing his deal, Johnson reluctantly agrees and a second referendum is held. At the time of filming, Johnson's government is dead against having another referendum, and Corbyn claims he wants a general election before anything else.
A general election.
But there are those in Labour who fear having a general election before Brexit is resolved would gift Johnson a massive majority. Instead, they want Corbyn to seek a referendum on Johnson's deal. As for Johnson himself, a second referendum might be difficult to resist. After all, he did win the first one, and this would basically be a rematch with the same teams. And it wouldn't be the first time he changed his mind on something massive at the last minute. As far as we can see, this is the only way that there could be a referendum on Brexit without a change of government. So for you spicy Remainers out there, this might be your best chance of cancelling Brexit completely. But what if the Conservatives mean it when they say they'll never allow another referendum? Well, then we enter the Benegeddon. This time, Johnson gets a deal, but Parliament says no and don't offer him any other way out. That means Johnson starts to feel the effect of the Benn Act. Named after Labour MP and Tony Benn's son Hilary Benn, the Benn Act requires Boris Johnson to seek a 3-month extension from the EU if Parliament doesn't approve a deal before the deadline. Boris Johnson doesn't want to do this, but it's the law, so he'll have to, unless he wants to remain behind bars. Although, to be honest, the chances of him actually going to prison are regrettably slim. More likely, he'll just be overruled by a court, like in the prorogation judgment. Ultimately, we think he'll huff and he'll puff, and then he'll go ahead and write the letter to the EU requesting an extension, while making it clear to voters that he's only doing so under duress. Corbyn says once an EU extension is granted, Labour will support a general election. If this happens, chances are there'll be an election before Christmas, which is a bit of a melt personally for Alex and I, as we'll be out of the country for most of November, and this channel is at least nominally about general elections. All this assumes that the Benn Act will succeed in constraining Boris Johnson. What if it doesn't? In this scenario, Johnson doesn't get his deal passed and somehow gets around the Benn Act, meaning there's no extension. We therefore leave the EU without a deal on October the 31st. Leaving aside any legal challenges, after we've left without a deal, Labour will no longer have any reason to postpone an election. That means we'd have an election against the backdrop of no deal. Perhaps Boris Johnson would be rewarded by voters for his decisiveness, or perhaps voters would punish him for his recklessness. Your view on this really depends on how catastrophic you think no deal would be. Yet, Remainers won't be in any hurry to find this out, so hopefully this scenario is pretty unlikely. Instead, maybe Johnson takes his deal to Parliament, but it's rejected. He either resigns as PM to avoid writing the letter required by the Benn Act, or he loses a vote of no confidence and is replaced by a caretaker Prime Minister elected by opposition MPs. This caretaker PM then secures an extension and calls an election. The hardest part here is knowing who this caretaker Prime Minister would be. Who do you think you are? Long story short, Labour wants it to be Corbyn, but former Tory Remainers don't want it to be Corbyn. And neither do the Lib Dems, who don't want to fight an election in the leafy suburbs of Romania immediately after having handed the keys to number 10 to an ardent socialist. For their part, the SNP don't care who gets the job, so long as Scotland gets her freedom! Sorry, it's an easy joke. The consensus seems to be that a vote of no confidence followed by a caretaker government is the least likely scenario for how Brexit is resolved. However, you can still expect to hear it raised on the news and on Twitter in the next couple of weeks. This is because it's politically useful for both Labour and the Lib Dems to use it to blame the other for not doing everything to oppose Brexit.
Are those really the only things that can happen?
Of course not! There's loads of other possibilities, like a short technical extension, or a caretaker government that starts renegotiating with the EU directly. Or maybe someone will accidentally awaken the Kraken and Britain will be rightfully swallowed by the sea, or as the ERG calls it, Atlantis++. But whatever happens, what won't change is Johnson's need to get his deal passed through Parliament, the numbers in this Parliament that make it hard for him to do so, and the obligations of the Benn Act should he fail to do so. If you understand those three things, you're basically in as good a position as anyone else to predict what will happen next.
Oh, great! I would totally like, share and subscribe. Ugh, I hate these ads.